Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this live stream with me, Dr. Aparajita Jidigunta. It is Focus Friday, and so today we are going to focus on a how-to. I am so glad for those of you who are joining me live or watching this later. I'm so glad you're able to do that. And I hope these videos continue to provide you with some value and some insights and tips on how you can take care of your personal development and professional development, because they're all highly interrelated. This is what I do as the founder and CEO of AJ Rao. These are the kind of trainings that I give to companies, as well as one-on-one to individuals and in group settings, because my whole business is about diversity, equity, and intentional inclusion through whole person leadership development. So with that being said, that today's topic is actually a huge favorite topic of mine that I love to talk about all the time. And I've been having many discussions about this in my circles and with my clients and with various companies. Now, before I get into this topic, I do want to say, give a huge shout out and thank you to a few other experts who are in this space who continually inspire me and challenge me to keep growing myself. Lily Zhang, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, and you can find them on LinkedIn. Dr. DM Mooney, who is an organizational psychologist. You can also find them on LinkedIn. Melissa Alvarez Mangual, who is an ED and who was one of my speakers in the inaugural C3EB Summit. You can again find them on LinkedIn as well as a couple of my favorite coaches, Carolina Aramburo and Zanzibar Vermilio. All of these people have been instrumental in me continuing to develop my business and my thoughts about inclusive leadership. So I want to thank them all for inspiring me. And at the same time, I want to be able to give value of my own to everybody listening to this, whether now or later. So here are, so let's get into it. How to be an inclusive leader. Now, obviously, this is a huge topic, and we can't get into every aspect of it in a live stream. We would be sitting here in a live stream for 6 straight months if that were the case. So let me preempt by saying that today's live stream is a nutshell version of how to be an inclusive leader. If you have any questions that come up, don't hesitate to put them in the comments, or if you don't want to put them in the comments, my email address is scrolling on the bottom. Don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions that come up. Like I said, this is the work that I do, and this topic on how to be an inclusive leader is a gargantuan topic. So today is going to be the nutshell version. Okay, so let's get into it. And today I'm going to do something a little bit differently. Okay, I'm going to start off with point number 5 and get to point number 1. So there's 5, I'm going to give you 5 steps on that you need to address if you want to be an inclusive leader, if you want to practice inclusive leadership, where you are including all of your people so that they are thriving, where you are empowering and inspiring all of your people to thrive, to engage, and to be the best versions of themselves. So I want to give you 5 tips today, and I'm going to start with number 5, actually, because this is a sort of a countdown to number 1, which is number 1 is going to be the most critical step. But let's start with number 5. So in order to be an inclusive leader, the fifth thing that you want to do is you want to address the power dynamics in your structures, in your organization, in your spaces. What this means is, 1, you have to get a very clear understanding of the real historical inequities, disparities, and injustices that have happened to people over the course of time to marginalize them, to make them feel marginalized, to make them feel powerless. Because the truth of the matter is that our structures, when they were created, the idea of corporations and all of these ideas and concepts and institutions that we operate in, when they were created way back in the day, were not created with everybody in mind. We know that because, again, if you listen to any of my past videos, I say this a lot. Diversity has always existed, but we have not addressed the inclusion and equity of that diversity in the way our society has been built. So really, to be an inclusive leader, at the end of the day, you have to be able to address the power dynamics in your structures, and you have to be able to shift that power to make it more equitable. Because power, again, is not a zero-sum game, just like inclusion. Inclusion is not a zero-sum game. So the more power and autonomy that your people have or feel like they have, the more they are able to include themselves, and the more you as an inclusive leader are able to include them. So addressing the power structures to make sure that there is an equitable flow of power is incredibly critical for you to be an inclusive leader. Now, how do you address the power dynamics in your structures? That's step number 4. So that's one step above, and that is understanding the intersectionalities of identities and biases. Let me break this one down just a little bit. I'm sure, especially if you are delving into diversity, equity, and inclusion thought with thought leaders and, readings and everything else lately, this idea of intersectionalities comes up more and more and more because it is a very important construct and concept. Intersectionalities was put together, that this idea was brought about by Kimberly Crenshaw back in the 70s, but it's an important concept for us to understand, and that's that our lived experiences are different because there are so many layers to our identities. And how those layers intersect in our lives determines how we perceive our experiences. It determines how we react to our experiences. It determines how we react to situations. For instance, as a very concrete example, if somebody has consistently had their voice taken away in corporate situations, if they've not been given the space to speak up, to give their opinions, if they move into a new company where they feel like things are similar, they are not going to speak up because historically, again, their past has told them that they don't have that power. And that power, again, comes from how our identities intersect with each other. But we also, in addition to understanding, for us to address these power dynamics, not only do we have to understand what people's identities are and what all of their layers are, we also have to understand how our biases intersect, right? Because at the end of the day, cognitive biases are a part of the human fabric. So if anybody tells you that there is a training that is going to completely eliminate bias, run. Because that's literally impossible to do. You can never eliminate bias because our brains are structured to pay attention to biases. And in fact, some types of biases are good for us. They're good for our survival. So understanding the biases, though, by becoming aware of them and by understanding how our people's different biases then intersect to produce the behavior that they do, is an important skill for you to develop and practice if you want to be an inclusive leader. What do I mean by that? If somebody is, for instance, a woman of color, then they have, then there are, in that situation, there are gender biases happening. But there are also, it seems like there's a little bit of lag, but there's a gender bias, and then there is also that cultural or ethnic or skin tone bias happening there. So that's almost like a double whammy, right? Now let's include all other aspects of our identity. When our religious background, our socioeconomic background, our educational background, every single part of our identity has biases built in. So not only do we have to understand other people's identities, who they are as people, we also have to understand the biases that are inherently built in, and we have to make ourselves aware of them as inclusive leaders, but we also have to make the other person aware of them as well. Because by being aware, we can at least minimize or reduce those biases. We can never eliminate them. But in order to understand the intersectionality of somebody's identities or biases, we have to now go one step deeper. So that's point number 3 of how to be an inclusive leader. You have to be able to build and maintain psychological safety and trust with your leadership presence. Psychological safety and trust are incredibly important concepts. This is why a lot of employees don't engage. This is why a lot of employees don't report anything negative happening, because they don't want to face the negative consequences, because there's a real threat to their psychological safety. There's a real emotional tax to having to report these and possibly face the consequences of negative feedback, discrimination, or harassment. As an inclusive leader, it is your responsibility to build and maintain that psychological safety and that trust with your leadership presence. Now, leadership presence is different from leadership skills. You may have all the leadership skills in the world, but if you're not presenting yourself as an authentic, inclusive leader who genuinely cares about your people, who genuinely listens, who genuinely creates space for dissent, who genuinely creates space for feedback, for discussions, for openness, for integrity and honesty and accountability, then you're not showing leadership presence. So leadership presence is when you show up as that, and by you being the role model of showing openness, authenticity, integrity, and showing trust, you build it in those around you. But in order to do that, we then have to take another step deeper. And that is, so in order for you to maintain and build your psychological safety and trust in your spaces, you need to consistently practice developing your emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the key to any good leadership model out there, right? Because emotional intelligence has 4 main components. One, 2 of them have to do with yourself, and 2 of them have to do with others. It is about being aware of your own emotions and managing them, and then being able to recognize others' emotions and being able to manage them as well. So you have to be able to create spaces where people are allowed to feel emotions. They're allowed to feel what they feel, because feelings are valid, but then you have to manage them in a way that does not minimize the other person, that includes the other person, and that acknowledges the other person, right? Even if it is negative feedback, whatever it may be, consistently practicing and consistently developing your emotional intelligence muscle is key for you to be an inclusive leader. Now, remember how I said that there were two kind of dimensions of emotional intelligence, the self and the other dimension? So, in order for you to be able to consistently practice and develop your emotional intelligence, we now have to dig one more step deeper and get to the root of how to be an inclusive leader. So step one, the first step you have to take in order to become an inclusive leader is you have to make your own invisible visible to yourself. You have to understand your emotions. You have to understand your strengths. You have to understand and acknowledge those parts of yourself that you don't like, that you repress. In the energy work field, this is called shadow work. But really, it's about being emotionally intelligent with yourself, understanding what parts of you are not showing to other people and why. What parts of you you're not even seeing, or that you're willfully ignoring or unintentionally ignoring, and why. And how can you make more of yourself visible to yourself? Because when you start seeing that you are a whole human being with mistakes, with imperfections, with strengths, with all of that, that then allows you to take ownership of your vulnerability and to use that vulnerability in spaces so that you can be vulnerable as a leader. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Owning your vulnerability, owning your humanity, owning your very humanness of making mistakes and still moving forward and learning from them is the foundational mark of an exceptionally good leader. So in order for you to do that, you have to make your own invisible visible to yourself. So let's work backwards now. One, you make your own invisible visible to yourself. This allows you to then understand your own emotions, understand how to manage those emotions, and understand that other people will have all of these layers too. Using that, you can consistently practice developing your emotional intelligence. As you practice and develop your emotional intelligence, you can then put into play things that, behaviors and initiatives and thoughts that allow you to build and maintain psychological safety and trust with your leadership presence among your people. Once you've built that psychological safety and trust, it is going to empower your people, your personnel, to start opening up with their own intersectionalities, with their own identities, with their stories and their biases, so that you can then help them manage that and learn from there. Once you get this more complete picture, which again all starts with yourself, that's when, from that place of curiosity and vulnerability and growth mindset, you can address the power dynamics in your structure to make them more equitable. Now, like I said, this is just a nutshell. And this is the training that I give to people in my coaching programs, in my coaching practice. Now, granted, this training that I do to build conscientious, energy balanced, whole person developed, inclusive leadership is not for everybody. But in 6 months, you can be the inclusive leader that you want to be if you are committed, if you are the right person. And this is why I don't offer it to everybody, because again, it is not for everybody. But if this is something that you are committed to transforming into, email me. Let's have a chat. Let's see if this program works for you, and then we can go from there. And if it doesn't, I'll be able to give you and point you to other resources that will help you. because I won't lie, it is an intensive program, but at the same time, because it is an intensive program, the results are exponential in this. And that's why, it's hard for me to boil all of this down into this nutshell version too, because there is so much, as you can imagine, so much more that goes into every single step that I talked about today. But I hope at least these 5 things give you a high level understanding on how you can start your journey to transform yourself into an authentically and intentionally inclusive leader who does have a positive impact on those around you, because those are the kind of leaders we need to move us forward in our spaces toward equity and toward belongingness. So the more inclusive leaders that we can build, the better off all of us are going to be collectively. So again, I hope this helped you. All the 5 steps on how to be an inclusive leader. I would love to hear back from you. And like I said, if you don't want to comment, please make sure you email me if you have any questions. And I hope you enjoyed this, whether you're watching this live or watching this later. If you are enjoying this, please make sure you subscribe and like wherever you are. That'll just help me get the message out to more and more people. So that's a small ask that I have of you. And I'm looking forward to hearing back from you about this. And I hope this helps you. I'll be back on Monday with my Manifestation Monday live stream. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you get to practice some of these tips. Bye.